friends, thank you so much for joining me for another great interview. This month, I am super excited to introduce to you Jack West, who's the care and recovery pastor at Mariners Church. We're dear friends. We've been working together for 6 years at Mariners and had just so many great experiences as we work together to minister to the people who attend Mariners Church in probably the most difficult seasons of their lives. I have a great deal of respect for Jack. Let me tell you a little bit about Jack. Like I said, he's the care and recovery pastor at Mariners Church. He's been there for 6 years. And before that, he worked 7 years in the East Coast doing a similar job. So 13 years of experience caring for those who are hurting. And I know that's a huge weight, and Jack carries it so well. From my experience with him at Mariners Church, I was on the care recovery team before he came and after, and boy, what a difference that experience is. And Jack, I love your heart for people. Let me tell people about you a little bit more. He is married to his wife, beautiful wife, Julie, and he has 3 beautiful children, Vivian, Anderson, and Elizabeth. And so Jack's very busy running around doing his work. And thank you. Thank you for your time, Jack. Thank you for joining us. I know you will bless our community with what we have to talk about today. And we're going to talk about this idea of the mental health of all of us through this season of COVID, especially as we walk towards the season of the holidays. And so, Jack, welcome.
Thank you, Inez. I echo the sentiment. This is an honor to be together and do this form of ministry. We've had so many fun and exciting experiences together. Blue Christmas is one. We've been on faith adventures. It's really just fun to be here with you. And you're right. This is a season of challenge, like of no other, like I've never experienced. I think probably you as well. And so many of us are in uncharted territory. And that sounds trite because it's probably been said so much, but it's so true. We are all in this together in this storm.
Yeah, I want to start with you because being in the position that you're in, you're carrying an enormous amount of weight. You're kind of, a first responder. You're on the front line. And wanted to talk a little bit about what this has been for you as a pastor, how things have changed in your role and the things that you're doing now versus what you were doing before. What do you see in the community, and how are you taking care of yourself? I know that's a lot of questions, but I just want to start with, tell us more about what is it's like for you.
Well, that's so, like I said, unprecedented. The unique thing about this season for me is that I'm not seeing things that are different in terms of presentation, whether that's mental health symptoms or the condition of people's lives. It's just more. So it's like the tide is rising. So it's this sort of increase of what we feel, the fragility that we have, and just the way that expresses itself through the way things break down in our lives. So if I have anxiety, if I was wrestling with that before COVID, it's just, heightened, right? So it's the water levels rising for everybody. For me personally, it's the same. So, and I think just water rising, the tide of my own grief comes in at the end of the year anyway. And that's true for a lot of people. And now we've got more force behind that movement because of what's happening on the ground around us in terms of COVID and the losses we've experienced. And so in the midst of that, for me, taking care of myself has never been more important. And I've come back to self-care is no longer an option. And it kind of is always, in my sense, critical to the task of, but you have more in normal time, you have more margin, right? So I can kind of put off things, or I can take a week off of some of those practices. But now it's actually, those things actually keep me grounded in a way that if I did not do them, I would definitely not be functioning right now, just to be quite honest with you.
What are some of those things? What are you doing to care for yourself?
Well, the first thing I actually really paid close attention to in the very beginning from a mentor of mine who introduced me to through therapy that I've actually done for myself, understanding how stress impacts the body. So whether that's good stress or distress, the kind of stress that is from anxiety and pain, it all impacts my physiology. And so I realized that my body and my nervous system revs up. Like there's a noticeable feel that I have. So there's tightness in the chest, there's tightness in my neck, there's limbs in different instances and different types of emotions my limbs can get more tight. So I realized that after coming off of a really good day of where positive things were happening and work was really good, or a day where, the day just took the air out of me, I've got to land my body. I've got to put practices in place, like walking slow. I've done yoga practices, not in a studio, but I've learned the movements that are critical to keeping my body flexible. Time without stimulation is really important. I mean, for me, that's so, like, got off social media, have spent time in the morning just quiet. Like I said, I have 3 kids. Like, it's really hard to find quiet space in my house.
Yeah.
But I realize I have to get up early and do that, because if I don't, then I recognize the impact on my body and things start to deteriorate. And first thing I notice is just my thinking, and then the way that deteriorates, and there's negative thoughts that don't seem to, I can keep at bay. And then, of course, the physical symptoms as well.
You said something earlier. You said walking slow.
Yeah.
Normally people say, walk fast. It's a good way to get rid of energy, but walking slow, what does that mean? Are you, like, physically trying to force yourself to slow down?
Yes, and that's it. What it's called. The nervous system has 2 aspects of it. There's the sympathetic side of the nervous system, which is sort of the gas, which is sort of arousal, excitation. So, a sympathetic charge we would use our nervous system to promote muscle movement. Like and then there's parasympathetic charge, which is that sort of engagement in the nervous system, which slows it down. Mm-hmm. And so walking very slow, and I mean painfully slow. I do this at night, because if you saw me doing this during the day, you'd think I was disoriented or probably something was wrong.
Is it like the Tai Chi kind of movements that are like really robotic kind of feel?
Well, it is very slow, and it's very uniform and purposeful, but I try to maintain a relaxed physiology. And so it's almost like, it kind of looks a little bit like that, but I'm trying to do as little muscle contraction as possible. Mm-hmm. And the bilateral movement is another part of that, which actually soothes the nervous system. So it's ambulatory, sort of engagement, which is that walking, slow walking is a way that God designed our bodies to actually reduce the sympathetic charge and bring our physiology to a rest, which is pretty profound, because we're actually moving, but because of the way our mind and our body works, and both hemispheres need to be engaged in that slow, purposeful movement, it can bring the mind and the physical body to rest, which is very important.
And, obviously, you're on the front line. You're dealing with a lot all day long. And if you don't find a way to, like, unwind that somehow, it'll do, obviously, great deal of damage to you, which means you can't help others. So
that's right.
Thank you, first of all, for modeling self-care and kind of giving us a picture of what does it look like to look for ways to have self-care for ourselves. So those are great tips, and I'm grateful you do that, because I'm thinking, I think you and I talked about this earlier, how, and we don't want to compare you to a fireman, because they're very different roles, but, there's a sense of you're out there helping people while, maybe putting out fires while your house is on fire. And it's not that something's wrong with your family or any of that, but you're a person dealing with these situations as well. You're living out, we're all living out this experience, which in one way is a positive. But the negative side of it is that we're all dealing with the experience, including those who are caring for others. And so self-care is so important. Thank you for modeling that. Now, let's look back at 2020 and kind of like the journey that we have walked through emotionally. And like you said, people's, whatever they were dealing with, or however they were dealing with their challenges, it's not like it went away, and it's not like it became something new. It got heightened. And so tell me a little bit more about that, and how you've seen people respond, and what do you see in the mental health situation out there right now?
Yeah. when I look back at 2020 and I look back at the beginning of the pandemic, it was, we didn't know exactly how it was going to pan out. So we felt like the horizon was located in one place. And as we kept walking and we kept moving, it's that false horizon, which in a hiker's world can be disheartening, especially if you're coming up a very steep incline and you're coming to the end of what you thought you needed to put out to get to that point. And then you realize, oh, there's another peak, or there's another horizon that's further out. And I think that is what's been happening over and over again. Like, I think that's happened more than once. And early, and it was, when we thought the lockdown in the beginning, right? The 15-day lockdown. You can remember that we actually thought it was going to be 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. And we got to the end of that and we realized, okay, that we haven't made a dent. The curve hasn't flattened. Okay, now there's another set of things. And I think that just heightened, well, first of all, the uncertainty heightens everyone's anxiety. So if I had anxiety coming in, it's going to be heightened by sort of the uncertainty of the future. And then we keep hitting these sort of false horizons, if you will, or peaks. And there's that disappointment in that sense. So if I had sadness and struggle with depression before, these sort of losses, if you will, or deep disappointments that come are going to just land on top of that pile.
Yeah. So good, because I think what you're pointing to is we all have the ability to endure up to a certain point. Like we can psych ourselves out, like, okay, I will make it because it's this much time and then it'll be better. The light at the end of the tunnel kind of thing. And then you get into the tunnel and the light just keeps moving. You're moving, it's moving, and you're not reaching it.
Right.
Say we find it to be harder. I immediately came to mind. I ran a half marathon many years ago down towards Carlsbad. And up Torrey Pine, which is a super high hill. And I thought I was such a rock star. I made it up that hill, made it down the hill. And I thought I was going to be downhill the rest of the race. But no, there were several other hills after. And the last hill nearly killed me. I mean, it was so hard. So those are the pictures that came to me, this idea. We think, okay, we climbed that hill. We're on the other side. It's going to be better now. It's going to end. And then there's another hill and another hill and another hill. And, do you see people like just wanting to quit?
Yes. And you see the coping skills, right? So everybody came to the start line, if you will, of this whole thing with a way of dealing with, disappointment, anxiety, loss. And then and some of those things were, okay, healthy. Some of them were, like negligibly healthy. And some of them were just downright toxic. And we were already heading down a destructive path. And so those ways of coping, of ways of getting over the next hill or dealing with the fact that we're not yet over and we thought we were, just sort of were enhanced. And so we saw a lot of people, and have seen a lot of people who had sobriety, lost their sobriety because they went back to some of those old coping mechanisms. I mean, years and years of sobriety. And we saw people who, didn't have necessarily an unhealthy relationship with food. Now it became unhealthy, or maybe their drinking was manageable, or at least within the realm of health, and then now it's become a crutch. And it's not an addiction, but it's definitely something that they have become dependent upon. And that applies to all the various ways that we cope, right? Social media, other forms of distraction, and all these things are now blossoming because we have this, in one way, in sense, like we have this fright, this constant news feed that's telling us bad news, and we don't really have a way to escape it. Yeah. Like there's no, there's no vacation, there's no place we can go. And even, think about now as we've gone back into more restrictions, which is going to bring up memories of the earlier this year. Wow, that's kind of a bummer. Yeah. Into that. So even the best of us, even now, as we go backward in California and many places in the country, we're almost we're dipping back into some of those old feelings of being trapped.
And, you have the issue of endurance, which, I think is what you're talking about, enduring difficulty and a challenge, which has its own pattern. How do we deal with that? But you layer that with loss. This year, we've lost so many things. Some people have lost their businesses, their jobs, relationships, marriages imploding, a financial catastrophe for so many. People have actually lost loved ones. Obviously, thousands of people have died over COVID. And so then you've got loss and the grief. So one is endurance, which is hard enough. But then you add grief to that. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. Well, I would say endurance is the category that just everybody's working with regard to how am I going to get through this with the resources that I have or that I can put together. And grief is then, I think, the process by which we all emotionally come through this event. And the event isn't necessarily just 2020. It's our society, our community is coming through having had a way that life worked. It was somewhat predictable and dependable, and then all of that was shattered, and there's no getting out of that, right? So then that necessarily puts us into these stages of grief, which I think a lot of us are familiar with. Some great material. The first stage is denial. So I think that was a big part of what we saw early COVID. Is it 15 weeks? So this idea that like we can handle it. It's not a problem. Now I think we're probably more in the stage of bargaining, which is the second stage. Kind of that idea of like how could it have been different? What if we'd done this? Maybe it isn't really that bad. We kind of vacillate between accepting the fact that it's here and that we've lost something, and then wondering, maybe it isn't quite that bad.
It feels like we've been bargaining all year, right? And we've been bargaining with the problem and bargaining with each other. And it's like, no, it's not that big a deal. We're trying to find people who will agree with us in our own bargaining journey, which is different than, typical, when someone is grieving, they're alone. Let's say a family might be grieving the loss of a loved one, a group of people. But when you have everyone grieving collectively and bargaining differently or being in different stages of bargaining, it kind of creates a culture of bargaining. I feel like we're living in that. We're all trying to, and is that confusing? It's so confusing right now to know, which way is right. What's the right thing to do? So what a disorienting experience it is to be in that bargaining stage. Denial seems a bit bliss because at least we're a little disconnected from the reality. But once right now we cannot ignore the reality of what we're dealing with. So we're trying to cope with it in a different way. So, and
there's anger. Don't forget about anger. I forgot about that one. That one sits between denial and bargaining. And there's plenty of that to go around to know how committed we are to pushing against and fighting the reality that we're facing.
Yes. And now, so now, by the way, I want to show our friends the books that talk about these different stages of faith, because I knew we were going to talk about this, so I prepared ahead. So guys, this book on grief and grieving, it's fantastic. And it kind of covers these stages of grief. And so if you want to check this out on Amazon, it's really wonderful. And Elizabeth passed away, but David requested permission from the family to continue on the work on this research that they did on grief. And he wanted to add a sixth stage. And so he came up with this book, which just came out this year, called Finding Meaning, which he says is a sixth stage. You can see the little stages here. And he came up with the last stage. But so you've talked us through denial, anger, bargaining. And if we're in the bargaining stage, what comes next?
Sadness, sorrow. Yeah. That's slipping into the place that we ultimately need to come to in order to find that meaning that's on the other side. And of course, acceptance comes after sadness, but I think meaning is a beautiful category to put as the sixth stage, but ultimately it comes through the threshold of the sorrow.
Yes. Now, I know that these stages aren't linear. Sometimes we experience them out of order or one longer than the other. We might cycle through them again. But collectively, like you say, if we're in this sort of a denial for 2020, or excuse me, not denial, bargaining, right? We're still trying. By the way, just yesterday, there's an event coming up for Christmas for an organization I'm involved with, and we're all trying to literally by email, bargaining back and forth about whether or not we should have this event, and is it outside, and how many people, do we wear masks? I mean, so it's like we're constantly trying to cope with this reality. And ultimately the event was they decided to cancel it. So I think this morning I woke up with this sadness. This is such a special event. We do it every year, and we're not going to be together. And I feel like this is a picture of what we might be looking forward to 2021, a sense of maybe we're all coping right now, but hey, what comes next is it might bring some sadness. So would you prepare us for that a little bit? What 2020 might be like?
Well, sadness I think in sorrow certainly gets a bad rap, because our bodies really resist it at a deep level, because it is somewhat of intuitively it's a dissolution. It's sort of a coming undone, that feeling of like unraveling a bit. And we resist that. And I think a lot of times we do that because we feel as though we are doing this alone. And intuitively, if we are alone and you come apart and there's no one to put you back together, then that's a dangerous thing. Yeah. So that's why it's easier to grieve it's easier to allow ourselves to feel that sorrow when we're around others, especially others who are there and who are willing to be empathetic and to bear that burden of sorrow with us. And somewhat of the silver lining of all this is that we're all going through it. This is. We're all in the same storm, as one person told me. We're not all in the same boat, but we're in the same storm. And so there's this common experience that we can share. Everyone has lost something in this experience. And so I think that's the communal aspect of it gives our body, the fact that we're not alone in our grief, gives us our body that signal that we can enter the sorrow. And like we said, it's not a linear process. So I don't think we should just wait for a time that we're suddenly going to feel sad. I think we can tap into that sadness at any time, underneath the anger, perhaps, behind the bargaining, certainly behind the denial. If we think about the ways in which we don't want to be here. And really, why is that? Well, because there's something here that feels unsettling and sad.
Yeah, it's good.
We can do that. We can do it together.
Yeah. In fact, as I'm hearing you talk, how important it is. We started this talking about how you self-care, which was really modeling for us the importance of our self-care, and to be in touch with our feelings and be okay with these various messy stages, and be willing to talk about it with others, because we are all to some extent having enough of a similar experience that it feels like we're not, it's easier to feel not alone in this situation. Right. And therefore, I think everyone can relate with, okay, today I'm frustrated, or I'm sad, or I'm angry, or I'm trying to find my way. And some people are like, I'm optimistic, I'm on the other side of the, it's okay that we're all in different stages, because we've all been there in a way. Yeah. We're all together in that. Now, do you think that there is like a shoe that hasn't dropped yet? Like people are coping and dealing with it, but that as this, especially now that we're becoming more aware of how much this is going to drag on, like here, with the new closures, the increased numbers of COVID, there's a sense of like, okay, there's a vaccine coming, but it's going to take a while before that actually gets to everyone. And so it's like, like you say, the light at the end of the tunnel, this just got further and further away. And is there like should we be prepared, especially for those of us who have loved ones who are in a very delicate situation? Should we be prepared for maybe a bit more harder time, a more emotional dip, shall I say? And how do we prepare, and how do we care for those we love? Care for ourselves. You kind of gave us that picture, but how do we care for those we love who are probably going to go further down in this hole?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the when we think about perhaps going through another round of this, or something that's, another horizon that we're going to get to, that puts us further, where we feel further away from the end of the tunnel, or the light at the end of the tunnel. I think anxiety is going to have to be a big, we have to be very aware of that. And anxiety works on us at very low frequency, if you think about it. Like, one of the physical example of this, in terms of just sort of, but one of the most difficult things on a human physiology is driving a car, because the vibrations are so minute, but they always keep the muscles taxed. And so if you've ever driven for 8 hours, you get out of the car and you're just
exhausted.
spent. Because you just sat there. But a doctor once told me this analogy. It's because there's this constant sort of low grade vibration that's going on all the time. Well, anxiety as an emotion kind of works that way on us in times like these, where really, I mean, every time you open up your news feed, you're just not sure what you're going to see. And the span, or the realm of what we've experienced in terms of the number of deaths, the lockdowns, the extremity of our situation, we're just sort of prepared or we think we are, but it's that anxiety is what our body is just trying to keep us sort of hyper vigilant and ready for what's going to come next.
And that's exhausting.
So it's totally exhausting. This is why I walk slow at night, and I look like it, like I'm lost and dazed and confused. Because there's just a way that we have to unload that on a daily basis. I think we just have to be able to say, and we have to look out for others who struggle with anxiety, and recognize that whether you did before or not, it's a factor. And we have to give ourselves the compassion to be anxious. And this is really hard, I think, in Christian circles, because we're, be anxious about nothing. Anxiety or fear is almost like a seen as a sign of faith. Yeah, like I'm doing it wrong. Like I'm just getting life wrong. And look, here's another thing that isn't working this year for me, is my faith. And that's not the case. That's not the case at all, because we don't get to choose how our bodies respond to our environment. In terms at this level, at this sort of sensory level. And so we only get to choose what we do with it. And so caring for it, not judging it, being compassionate of others who are anxious, who, and anxiety can look different. It doesn't look like just sitting there wringing my hands. It can be anger, like a hair trigger on our anger. It could be just shutting down. Like, I'm flat out, like I'm not high, and I'm just trying to basically, maintain. And so I don't engage in things. And so anxiety can turn into a depressive kind of feature or presentation. So anxiety takes a lot of different forms, but ultimately it's got to be dealt with care, compassion, physical touch, physical, ways we address our body, whether that's getting adequate sleep, which, sometimes it's hard with anxiety, but doing the best that we can in order to manage that effectively.
Deep breaths.
Yes.
Like taking
breathing.
Yeah. And obviously anxiety has a little bit of a stigma. I think people, they don't want to associate themselves. If they don't have an anxiety issue, then I think some people are like, well, I'm not like that. I don't have that problem, Right. And I think anxiety is one of those things where, like, it will be seen. It can't be ignored. It will show itself when you least expect it. I have a dear friend who had her first panic attack. Was so startling to her, but as she learned to understand her body and how things were working, she realized that when the feelings would start to come up, if she not embrace them. I'm not saying like, oh yeah, I'm having an anxiety attack, but more like, okay, I'm anxious. It's okay that I'm okay. I'm going to be okay, but I get to ride this wave and kind of work with yourself. She would work with herself, breathing. She would touch her forehead, did different things to kind of just be in the moment. And that would help her through it, because the more we fight it, the worse it gets.
Right.
That's what she said. She's like, it would just get worse. If I ignored it or pushed it away, it would just get worse. And so, it sounds like during this season, what you're really kind of calling us to is to be very aware of where we are. Years ago, I remember when we did a Blue Christmas service, you talked about standing in the ground that we're on, like being in the present and really being there and feeling the feelings and having the thoughts. And can you tell us a little bit about that again and why that's so important, especially in a time like this?
Yeah. I mean, being present is probably being ourselves is the hardest thing a human being can do. And being present in the moment is also a part of that. It's the most incredibly courageous thing to do, and also the hardest thing to do. And hard in the sense that it's we have to let go, and that's oftentimes the most difficult thing. We have to let go of the way the past has shaped us, and what we believe because of that shaping the future holds, and really be present to what's happening right now. Now, it doesn't mean that the past goes away or that somehow, we can somehow not think about the future. It just means that in order to be present, we have to let go of those things, and then those things come back to us in a way that actually helps us move forward, which means we're not bound to the past. And we can step into the future with hope. And I think being the difficult thing about being present is something we talked about before, is that to be present is always to face one half of life, which is loss, and the other half, which is gift. I mean, if you want to divide it into those two things, and we've talked already about how difficult it is to face all the losses that this season has presented us. And that's a part of being present, is to be able to say, yes, I have lost, and there's a journey I have to go through that, to process it, to come to the other side, to come to acceptance. And I have to go through all these different stages in different seasons or different times during this season. And that's a part of being present.
You know what? What just came to mind, Jack, is, for example, those who went through World War II. And collectively a nation or, people went through an experience together. It kind of bonded them in a special way, right? I mean, there's something about going through an experience like this collectively that in a silver lining manner kind of brings us together uniquely, and it's very impactful for the future. So that idea of being willing to be present for ourselves, but also for others, actually then perhaps can become a way of bonding with one another in a different way, right?
Yes. And that, I think that bonding that happens by being present to our reality, because we can only find each other, truly find each other in that bond of community, friendship, family, by being present to our reality. And I think that's where then we find this resource, the togetherness, the relationships, to face whatever comes next, whatever the newsfeed brings us. And I think that's the unique biblical hope that we have. It's not biblical hope isn't based on our desire for what we want of the future. It's based on God's activity to redeem the past and the present and the future. And so when we come together, we're coming together to affirm that projected redemption in the future together. And therefore, whatever comes tomorrow, whatever comes on the newsfeed, we have hope, and we have the ability to be sustained in community because of that unique kind of hope that isn't just based on optimism, for lack of a better term. And I think that's one of the things that's so dangerous about American optimism, is its opposition to hope, true hope. And so we have this opportunity to really be present to our situation, and all that means find each other in that connection, and then step into the future that God is active in creating.
Let me rewind you back.
Yeah.
Optimism that is opposed to hope.
Yes.
Unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, American optimism in that form of it is really based on sort of our ability, because we are a very developed nation. We have a lot of power in terms of on the in socially, there's a lot of us who we can buy our way out of things. We can move around. Our society is free when you look at it compared to most societies on the planet. There's just a lot of forward movement that sort of built into our psyche that is possible, right? And it's all based on our ability to pull it off, and that's a form. I mean, sometimes that form of optimism is freeing. I mean, I think about countries around the world where they don't have that kind of optimism, right. and it's debilitating, right? So I'm not like trashing it. I'm just saying it's not hope. It's different. It is its own form of motivation, but it is not ultimately this very profound way of living, the hope, which really comes out of faith, and faith in God, faith in his ability he's done what he needs to do to bring about redemption, and he will do it again. Yeah. And so it's that kind of that type of hope that's really cultivated in relationship with others who are willing to put their feet on the ground, because hope always stands in opposition to the facts on the ground as well. I mean, that's a biblical hope, right? That's what we see, because that's hope that we can see isn't hope. I mean, Paul said that. So it's this opposition to the goodness in the future is really coming against what we see on the ground, but there's still this ability to project what God's going to do forward into the future, because we're connected in relationship. We have this sort of bond of grief and of loss and of knowing that God is going to make things right. Yeah. In fact, we're headed towards Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. And, already it's going to change for us here because of all the closures and such and, the new restrictions. But how do we engage with our loved ones in this season, whether we're sitting across the table or meeting through Zoom? Like, what is our posture in a time like this? What should it look like so that it's fruitful? Because, the elections, we didn't even touch the elections, right? And how that has brought all kinds of divisions in family. In my own family, we have 5 adult children, all of them married. So that's 10 adults and 9 grandchildren, and some of them are 16 and older, and so we've got all these different views in our own family, and we're not all going to gather together the way we normally have this year, because some of them are not going to travel, and there's just complication this year. How do we go? Give us a word for Thanksgiving. Well, I think so. What I said before about hope and about community, and it not being based on our desire, and the future is really something that God is creating for us, and we're stepping into, and it's something that He's already done. I mean, all that is really sounds great, but then how do you actually live out of? Well, what you just described is the perfect place to take practical steps of saying, okay, whatever we desire for the future, whether that was your person, in the office of president, or your elected official that you voted for. I mean, that's a preferred future that we all sort of invested in. And yet that is not what is going to bring hope. That is not the future that God is necessarily that we're banking on, right? Mm-hmm. Now, is He creating that? Is He working through those elected officials and those choices, or even the broken decisions that have got us to this point in COVID, like all the things that have gone wrong and some that have gone right? We believe that God is working in all of that. That's an active perspective of hope, that based on what I said before, what we said. But then, can I use that vision to turn to the person next to me and say, what matters is our love for each other, in the original bond. Even if we have to go back to the original bond that exists between us of love, that supersedes anything that comes with regard to my desire for who's in office, mm-hmm. or what I thought the economic possibilities were if this and this happened this year. All of that stands outside of or periphery to this bond that we can return to with each other and say, I will honor and love and respect that bond of love between us over all else in the world. And we could just say that. We could declare that to each other, and we could say, these things are important. It doesn't mean they don't matter, and it doesn't mean that we weren't invested in them, but they're all periphery to what we have here. And so in some ways, the meal of Thanksgiving can almost become a sacrament together. It can become a place where we say this meal and our ability to declare our love, no matter what, over and above all these other things that we've been through this year and invested in, this comes first. And our sharing this meal is an outward sign of that inward grace. That's a sacrament, right? And so to me, that's the activity and posture that brings about that kind of hope in our lives.
Kind of a commitment to, okay, we're going to be together no matter, these things come and go, but
Yes.
we're going to be together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm committing to be.
Forgiveness will have to be offered. You don't have to say it, but if you're going to show up and say those words, you will have to do it.
Yeah.
And you may have already had to do it. You may have to forgive them for their election choice. I don't care what side of the aisle it is.
Yeah.
You have to forgive them for, how they've ignored the mask protocols or, whatever the offense is. We have to arrive at that in order for that to be a sacrament that we take together in one sense. We've got to have forgiveness in the face of all that. I mean, there's something very biblical about that, that forgiveness, that the table of undeserving friends, is what one friend would say. That's how we should approach Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's beautiful. But they're friends, or obviously loved ones.
Loved ones, yeah.
Loved ones, yes.
And honestly, we don't really deserve each other.
Yeah.
Everything we put each other through.
Yes. Well, and the beauty and commitment to saying, I'm going to walk with you on this journey, even if it looks really messy or we're in different sides of this situation or different views. I'm committing to our relationship above or all else.
Yes.
What an impactful thing to say to one another, to be willing to make that commitment to one another. It's so soothing,
Yes. Yes.
Beautiful. And
I think it can happen on the screen, even if it's not in person. I think if we choose,
what I was going to say, what about those who are Zooming?
I think if you can make that if you have the boldness to make that declaration and say, it doesn't matter, we're going to realign the nature of our gathering around just this original bond and name all the things, or just lump all the things you disagree about. And I have disagreements with my family, as you do. We all have, in terms of this election season and even how this pandemic has played out. And but that all is periphery to the original bond I have with them, which is, they're my family, and I've already committed to love them.
Oh, Jack, that is so beautiful. I love that. What a great vision for how to walk this journey together, kind of locking hands with one another and say, okay, we're going to do this, but we're going to be at the end of this, we're going to be together. And I love that. I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. I am so grateful for this time that we had together. And I know there's a lot more we can talk about, but I think this is one of those things where you have to let it sink in and put into practice. So let me just recap what I heard and learned from you today. Yeah. One is the importance of self-care and recognizing that the things that are happening are affecting us physically and emotionally and obviously spiritually. And to not ignore those, but to actually take time to do some self-care, because we will look for something to make ourselves feel better. And if we're not intentional, we will use things that are not good for us, right? Whatever our go-to escape that we know is not good for us will always be there tempting us to go that direction. But we can be intentional with other things that we know are better for us. So that was some huge takeaway. The other is to recognize that we're all in some way not only trying to endure, but grieving at the same time. And that as bad as that is, we're also doing it together. And that's a good thing. And then to say, okay, we're going to commit to that togetherness above and beyond whatever else is happening. Which means we can encourage one another, we can carry each other's burdens, we can, I know in my family, nothing would be more beautiful, and I'm looking forward to this. I'm going to definitely try to lead that at our table, which will include some people on Zoom, which is to say, let's just spend some time affirming one another, and how important we are to each other and how much our relationships are exactly what's going to pull us through this difficult season, as opposed to the opposite. And making that commitment to one another. And like you say, being willing to forgive. That's a lot of good stuff. So, Jack, any parting words before we close this time?
Well, it's been an honor to talk with you. I think this conversation, like you said, we could go longer, because we were not through this yet. I mean, this is, I just look back at all the times we've thought, okay, we're coming to some sort of, inflection point, and it turns out it's up instead of down. So I love what you're doing. I appreciate the conversation. I think we have to do this together. I think, and that's the beauty of the race, is that it's, to me, honestly, it feels like we're coming closer together. People are beginning to see how much they need each other, how much they need community. And so that's the beautiful, beautiful fruit of all this that I see so far, is that there's just going to be this harvest of community, of recognizing our deep sense of our need for belonging, and the fact that we actually do belong. That we're not alone. And
we need to look for those who are isolated, or are isolating, right? And help them see that. So that is so good. In fact, I want to just, give a shout out that we're doing the Blue Christmas service again this year, but how special, right? It will be. And we don't even know how it's going to look because of all the different restrictions. So we're like pivoting.
It's going to be outside on the 7th of December at 7 p.m. at Mariners Church. It'll be outside. Originally, we thought we might do it inside, but we're gonna do it outside to honor safety.
Well, then the two wonderful things to keep in mind for that, and that is bring a nice warm jacket and stand be close to those who you love. Make sure you have somebody that you come with you that you're willing to get close to.
Another opportunity.
Yeah. So I look forward to doing that with you again. It's really a privilege. And again, thank you. Thank you for this time.
Thank you.
Hey guys, isn't this amazing? What a great conversation with Jack. Thank you for joining us. I think you're going to have to go back and rewind, listen to it again, because there's so many nuggets of wisdom through this conversation. And I hope it equipped you as you have your conversations with your loved ones over this holiday season. And as we continue into 2021 with COVID still here and with all the consequences of that. So there is hope, and we can hold grief and hope at the same time. That's really the beauty of the gospel, is that we actually can hold both at the same time and hold it together. So God bless you. Thanks again. I look forward to seeing you again on our next interview. And please share this with those who can benefit from this conversation. The only way it gets out is because you share with others, and I hope it will be a blessing to them as well. God bless you.